Welcome to the Jeffco DeAngelis Foundation podcast series focusing on school safety and security. My name is Kevin Carroll, Executive Director for the Foundation. Throughout this series, we will be engaging in informative conversations with local, national, and even internationally recognized experts in the arena of school safety. We'll be exploring best practices in crisis preparation, response, and recovery, as well as gleaning lessons learned from these remarkable professionals. We will also be having conversations with people who personally experience school and community shootings, as well as other community tragedies, as with our guest today, Westminster Police Sergeant Tim Reed. The Jeffco DeAngelis Foundation originated in Jefferson County, Colorado, with a deep passion for and a relentless commitment to sharing best practices in school safety and security with first responders, as well as school district, and other personnel. We, in partnership with Jefferson County Public Schools, support a one-of-a-kind training facility, the Frank DeAngelis Center for Community Safety. This former elementary school is now a premier training facility which has supported training for over 7,200 first responders. Our trainings encompass everything from the practical to the tactical, focusing on proven approaches to preparedness, response, and recovery. More can be learned about the training facility, our team of nationally recognized trainers, and the foundation itself by visiting www.deangeliscenter.org. And with that, it's my true pleasure to welcome our special guest today, Sergeant Tim Reed. Sergeant Reed oversees school resource officers for the Westminster Police Department and does a variety of other things as well that we'll learn about. Welcome, Tim.
Thanks for having me.
You bet. So, Tim, I'd like to begin by having our audience learn a little bit more about your career pathway. How did you get to the position that you're in currently?
So I'm starting my 25th year in law enforcement now, 23 years with the city of Westminster, and it's been a fantastic place to be. Through that time, I've done a lot of different police teaching and education instructorships, but I think some of the things that have influenced me most, I spent some time in the public information unit and public affairs, and that was a really great time to refocus on community, work with partners and do those things. And from there, I was promoted and went back to the road and worked the road for several years on nights, which was great. My girls were little then, and we didn't have to have daycare, so
Nice. Very nice.
Well, one of those times where you and your spouse just work it through. And then I went into investigations as an investigations sergeant, and did 5 years up there, and now I'm working as the supervisor for the school resource team, and this is a great mix of all the things that I could hope for in policing. We work in partnership with not only schools, but other organizations and juvenile justice systems, and we're just trying to do the right thing for kids and families. Protecting victims, but helping kids work through those decisions and those challenges in life.
So being in that role of the public information role, that really is that touch point with the community. I bet a lot of that work probably informed, like when you went back to doing patrol work and then moved up, that experience probably helped with all of that.
It definitely did. Yeah. The biggest thing personally for me was that it just reminded me that there are really good people out there, right? A lot of the times in police work, every call after call, you're dealing with crisis, and you're the mediator. And it was nice to go back into that role and work with partnerships and people where we could affect systemic change and support both sides of that equation. Not only the law enforcement officers who are coming to help, but also where can we impact the community and be commonly oriented for good solutions.
So mindsets really matter. We had the chance to have a discussion with Deputy Chief DeAndrea from our Arvada Police Department, and like you, very connected to his local community, longtime public servant. He talked about some mindsets. A law enforcement officer's mindset, from my own experience, can speak to. My brother was a law enforcement officer, and because he was constantly going to those concerns, those issues, those cries for help, in some ways, his general life perspective shifted a little bit to become a little bit more negative because that's what he was surrounded by. So is that a common?
It is, and it's a thing that we have to. That's a lesson learned for me, and as a supervisor now, I really focus with the people who are assigned to me. Remember why you started. We all sat down at the table and said, we want to help people. And regardless of the strife or the condition, remember that because that's what we're here for. And look for those touch points. There are challenges. And that mindset piece is a really hard one to work through sometimes.
Sure.
Especially when you're faced with significant cases or the same type of case over and over and over. Domestic violence. None of us who came into this work really had that in our background, right? Either in our family setting or whatever, but just to see that struggle, it's hard sometimes. So we have to remember why we started, and we have to focus on those positive things.
And part of your role then as a sergeant with your team is to keep tabs on how are my team members handling the stresses that are going on as a part of their day-to-day work, and then being able to address those with them, right?
Absolutely, yeah. I actually am in the process right now. About 6 months ago, I asked them to start focusing on a self-development goal of what do you do for self-care, right? Let's not just have it be this enigma that we don't really talk about it. No, let's bring it to the forefront so that we can protect ourselves and do those things to help. And I'm a believer that journaling and reading really is a helpful tool. So next week they don't know it, but they're all getting a book.
There you go. Now
right?
they might know.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
By the time this comes out.
Yeah, it's and it's my pleasure to be able to support and help with that.
Lieutenant Brian Murphy talks a lot about that too, that for you to be on when you're on, you got to take care of yourself when you're off. And that includes not only taking care of yourself as an officer, but those who take care of you too, like your family. Right? Watching out for those things. Yeah. Talk more about this role of the school resource officer and the positive impact that you see coming from proactive, positive relationships with schools and school districts.
Yeah, so in Westminster, our team has a goal, or our mission as a team. Number one, we're going to support the safety of those facilities, right? We're going to work in partnership with the admin teams or whomever comes to the table to make sure that those facilities are safe, no matter what that means. It takes a lot of different forms, right? But we want to make sure that number one, that's our goal. Second, we're going to build relationships, and that's actually those relationships support that facility safety goal. Without that, we can't do the first. And then the last thing, we're going to do the right thing for kids all the time. I've told my guys, if you get stuck and there's a situation where you ultimately say, this is the right thing for this kid, I'm going to support you. There's sometimes like at the end of the football game sometimes, right? All the
emotions are high.
Right, or all the parents are gone and the staff is dealing with something else and there's 2 kids left in the parking lot. And that SRO comes to me and says, I have another half an hour of overtime. You're doing the right thing for those kids. Thank you.
Yeah.
Right? Thanks for staying late, and I'm going to support you and sign off on that. That's what we're there for. It's simple things like that.
Absolutely. I had a chance to be a principal for a long time, and one of the things I most appreciated about school resource officers was their ability to do things proactively. What a difference it can make in building those relationships that you talked about, in helping kids before things get escalated, instead of having to come after something has happened and react. It can be more proactive.
Right. Yeah. People ask, what do you guys do all day? Well, we're busy. They're in amongst the students. That's the biggest thing. And that's a big deal for cops, right? We all see cops doing crowd control, watching a sporting event or something. Their backs are going to be a wall, and they're going to have a bubble around them. You walk in or see an SRO in the school, he's going to have kids right up close to him, all around him, right? Yeah. And so for cops to make that's another mindset transition, right? Just to be comfortable in that environment.
Sometimes that's a little bit hard for, at least I've noticed, officers who haven't had that experience. Like, let's say school resource officers off doing some training or something, and we have a patrol person come in. Their comfort level is a little different because it's a whole different environment. Here I am with 1,000 kids at a high school, and I'm used to patrolling, right? Used to being at the football game, and kids come up and say, "Hey, who are you?" And "Hey, where's Agent so and so?"
Yeah.
So sometimes it's a little awkward for a patrol person to come in straight off the street.
Yeah, I was at one of the elementary school drop-offs one morning in the hug and go lane, right? If I ever want to charge my batteries, that's right.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm there, and another sergeant comes by, and a kid gets off the bus and walks up to me and gives me a hug right around the duty belt. Right.
Yeah.
And I was,
it's my stuff.
Yeah. Right. Kid, you don't realize what
Nobody
you're touching.
touches that stuff.
Exactly. And the sergeant just looks at me like, I can't believe you let that happen. Well, yeah. Right. That kid, he wanted to say good morning with a hug. And I don't know that kid, but why not?
Yeah.
Right. There's no threat there. That's good.
Yeah. That type of relationship, I think, helps to provide support and comfort, understanding. Those school resource officers are trusted adults to be able to come to. And oftentimes I've saw high school kids go to the school resource officer when they wouldn't go to a staff member.
Yeah.
So that they get the help that they need, whatever that might be.
Right.
As opposed to being at arm's length without those relationships. Plus it provides intel too.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah. Well, there's two parts to that. Right. The kids know what resources are available within the school and where they need resource help outside of school. And sadly, SROs know that in today's world, a lot of the time, the only trusted adult in a kid's life is a teacher or their SRO. And those SROs provide a valuable service emotionally beyond just resources to kids. Being able to talk through things where it's mutually vulnerable conversation, right? I'm going to sit here and let's just chat it through. Let me do some life counseling or maybe, let's get you to a different resource. So much of the work that we do is mental health related, helping kiddos walk through crisis and being able just to follow up, right? The normal policing, you have a transaction with somebody. With this, we have a relationship. It's one of the things that SROs across the world ask for is, hey, patrol guys, when you go on a call that involves one of my kids, and they always say my kids.
Yeah, that ownership.
Right. Send me a note. So in the next day, I can go and touch in with that kid.
Follow up on them, make sure they're okay.
Yeah, make sure they're okay.
So what are we've been talking about some of the positives with school resource officer work. What are some of the common myths or misperceptions that you run up against when you talk to community members about that partnership between schools and law enforcement?
Yeah, the biggest myth is that school resource officers are some type of gateway to the criminal justice system. And I'm not going to deny we write tickets in schools,
sure,
occasionally, right? However, the vast majority of things that we involve ourselves in the schools are referrals directly from the school. So the school has worked through something and then says, hey, we need you to look at this also, right? We had a fight, for example, and it was a pretty significant thing, and one of the kids' eye is damaged. right? That's a criminal event
a big
also,
deal.
right?
Yep.
That's and we should support those kids who are hurt, injured, damaged, right? That's what we're there for. And also in our juvenile justice system, the focus is rehabilitation. So knowing that kids are going to get some type of service, whether it's anger management or community service, but something that they need to help prevent that behavior again, that's okay. And it's okay sometimes if the court imposes that.
Right.
Yeah. Another myth that we deal with is that cops are inside schools handcuffing and using force. And it is so rare.
I was going to say, occasionally we see stories like that.
Yeah.
Hear stories like that, and then assume that happens everywhere all the time.
Right. And that's one of those things that you can correlate to plane crashes. Right. We know when planes go down because it's so rare. We know when SROs have to use force because it's so rare. Right. And there are times that we'll handcuff a student or staff member. Most of the time, it's for their own safety, so that we can get them to a different
safely transport.
Yeah,
to wherever they need.
Yeah. But the other thing that we do is we protect their dignity. Right. We don't parade them through the halls. We make sure that the halls are clear and that nobody sees us moving people when they're in custody. So we try to limit any of that exposure to anyone because we know that they have to come back in that building and have those relationships.
Sure.
And we don't want to damage that.
So that all speaks to the kind of training and support that you have to give your team members so that they know, right? And the coaching that has to be done for patrol if they happen to be the ones who are coming when an SRO might be unavailable or needs the extra to support to do whatever needs doing. You have a complex job in the fact that you serve multiple school districts too in Westminster, right? How many do you serve?
We do. We have 3 full public school districts in 2 counties and a charter system of multiple schools. And we also have a community college. So top to bottom.
A lot of irons in the fire.
Yeah.
Different groups to work with. And so your communication experience really probably plays into that too. How to communicate with all those different agencies so that they understand what you believe your team needs and what they can expect from your team in that relationship. Right. And
how to support each of those districts in different levels. Because we have everything from the largest school district in the state down to, I think, smaller districts, right? And the charter schools, that's a district in a box, right? It's one building, K through 12 type of thing. So we're constantly trying to find common ground and things that are mutually beneficial, right? There are some things that we want to set expectations with as far as, if a crisis comes to the school, what should you expect? And a lot of times an SRO won't be in that building, especially like on the elementary school setting, right? Sure. Patrol is going to be there first. EMS is going to be there first. And a crisis could be something simple, like a teacher has a heart attack, right? So trying to help the staff set the stage so that law enforcement, fire, EMS can come in and do their work quickly and be as minimally disruptive. And here again, protect the dignity of people who are involved. Absolutely. So part of what I appreciate about Westminster PD and specifically you is the way that you do that outreach and that you are proactive about that communication. One of the things that I saw you step into was a relationship with Jefferson County Public Schools and their Community Safety Task Force. Yeah. Talk a little bit about that work. Great people. So the task force was a superintendent's initiative several years ago, and we really wanted to engage people and talk through what is those perceptions? What is reality? What are we trying to accomplish? And help people understand what the school security and boundaries look like. From everything from, we had some pretty frank tactical discussions, but also what's the mental health resources? How are we supporting that? And how does all this impact the climate and culture of each of those buildings? So working through that with, I don't know, there's probably 40 or 50 people there. That was a great exercise. And ultimately we broke down a lot of misconceptions.
I was going to say that was a big part of it, right? In addition to talking about opportunities and vulnerabilities, allowing space in that room and through the course of months and months and months of work, and I know groups are still getting together now, allowing people to air what their thoughts were about what we believe we should have within schools, and then understanding schools are not isolated. They're part of a broader community.
Right.
And you, in your role, you serve the whole community, whether people are in school or not in school. And so a lens and advice and experience like yours, I think, added such value and depth to that conversation.
I appreciate that.
You bet.
I was glad to help.
So in the school safety and law enforcement world, we often talk about the need to prepare for emergencies. And that's what the DeAngelis Foundation is all about, is training and preparation. But we need to prepare sometimes for threats that might impact us in a bigger way than we anticipate. So we train and hope that we're training enough, but we never fully anticipate things. I want to talk about October 5th, 2012. We experienced a tragedy that we'd never seen before and never want to again. 10-year-old Jessica Ridgway was kidnapped on her way to school and then murdered. Can you talk about that day and your role in that investigation?
Yeah, it's still get tingles as we, open this conversation. That was an incredible time in the history of Westminster Police Department and the community in general, right? Literally, that case had touch points from Wyoming to Colorado Springs, at least with community involvement. So October 5th, in the afternoon, we got a call of a missing girl. Patrol resources went out and worked it all night long and did a great job laying a fantastic foundation. And as they worked through the night, we realized that we needed additional resources, we needed additional tactics, and asked for help. Thankfully, we had great partnerships, not only with Jeffco schools, but also other law enforcement agencies, fire and EMS, the Colorado Bureau of Investigation, the FBI, and they all came to help. I remember the morning of the 6th, 4 or 5 in the morning, it was crazy early. We all met at Witt Elementary School, and that was our initial command post, and operations base. And we were working out of there. And in the Westminster Police Department, we didn't know what we didn't know.
I was going to say, when did that shift happen? Because we hear about kids who they didn't get where they were supposed to get, right? They either hung back with a friend, they decided to walk instead of take the bus, mom picked them up instead of dad, and 99% of the time we figure that out. It gets untangled, and then we go, whew, collective sigh of relief. But that call didn't come.
Right. So that's an interesting transition. That's a great segue in that. Normal missing persons calls, especially missing kids, right? When you look at the National Incident Study for Missing, Abducted, Runaway, and Throwaway Kids, the NISMART, that data tells us that basically 1.7 million kids go missing in the United States every year. When you start to break that down, the vast majority are those misconnections, right?
Sure.
Hey, I thought he was supposed to be here, but He's there, and okay, we got it sorted out. There are some family abductions, right? There's a big chunk of that. There's some non-custodial abductions, a smaller portion of those. But when you get right down to it, there's about 110 kids every year that are abducted by a stranger. So
at one point you said 1.7 million?
Of those 1.7 million kids. So we'd never had that before, right? Our community had never been impacted by that. And we needed additional help, training, resource from partners. And that was one of the successes of that case, is that Westminster PD's climate and culture is that the person at the lowest level is expected to make the decisions, right? And ask for support if they need it. And we checked our organizational ego at the door. That morning, as things were ramping up, and we were drilling through all those other investigative techniques, right? Okay, is this a misconnection, right? Jessica's father lived out of state. Okay, is this type of
custodial issues?
Yeah, it's a custodial issue. Where's the rest of the family? How do we look at all these different things? And all that stuff takes time, but we're narrowing the scope towards that 100. And once we hit that point, it changes. It fundamentally changes the way that law enforcement responds, and it fundamentally changes how the community responds. We had community members coming to us and demanding, basically, to be able to do something.
Want to feel like they could make a difference.
Yeah.
That's part of the challenge, right? We've talked about that in different crisis events too. The nice thing is when things happen, everybody comes.
Right.
The hard thing is when something happens, everybody comes, and that becomes a secondary issue that has to be handled.
Yeah.
So talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, command and control of these big incidents is important. And ultimately, I think that's one of the things that we succeeded at best in Westy for this case is we set up an operations center 24/7, staffed it, and knew how to organize people. That first morning, I remember folks were showing up to the local rec center not too far from Jessica's house. And when I mean people, I mean like thousands of people, right? And at that time, we had no way to manage that crowd, right? People were parking all over the place, and it's just, and I was getting calls from some of the PIOs who were deployed up there saying, we don't know what to do with everybody, right? They want to do something. And so we organized those people into groups and teams, and those were our initial field search teams, right? So we fanned people out across miles of open space, and they walked the open space. And we did some hasty training with them.
I was going to say training's got to be important, right? Because you can't compromise a scene and get in the way of you all being able to take the investigation further.
Right. Yeah, that's a huge lesson learned. In Jefferson County now, we have a stand-up child abduction response team. And one of the key elements of that is managing volunteer resources, especially for field searches and things like that. We've reached out with some of the CERT teams and the Police Academy alumni and done some training and done some things like that. But ultimately, we now have a process where we can screen through people, give them some training via YouTube, actually.
Yeah, any way you can, right?
Right. And before they show up, we can get them organized and get them going. Luckily that morning, community members who were also law enforcement who were off duty were showing up to help also. And so
put them in as team leaders, right? The different
that's
groups.
exactly it. Yeah. The PIO said, guess what?
Yeah, you're on.
You're a leader today.
Yeah. So during that time, talk a little bit more specifically about what your roles and responsibilities were through the tragedy.
So I was part of the operations center. We divided the department into two teams. Everything that was Ridgeway related, and then everything else. So
City's still running.
City was still
Crimes
running.
are still happening.
Yeah.
People still need help.
Exactly. So within the Ridgeway Investigation Operations Center, we had divided that into two teams, basically a day shift and a night shift. And I was part of the day shift operations command. And it was our job to make sure that each of the sections, groups, and roles was getting the information they needed, accomplishing the tasks. So it was and aligned, right? When we start talking about emergency operations, that is the key to emergency operations, is everyone has to have a common mission. You cannot go off on your own. I know AJ and I have talked about that before, right? If you talk about some of the pitfalls of some of these major operations, it's when someone thought they were doing the right thing, right? Good intentions.
Trying to do it, trying to move things forward,
but they didn't check in with command. And command had a specific intent with whatever the operation was. So in that room on any given day, during day shift, we would have 100 to 120 people doing different tasks and assignments. We eventually broke into, I think it was somewhere near 40 different operational modules. Yeah, it was incredible.
a ton of coordination.
It was a ton of coordination.
For our listeners who don't have any context for the case, can you walk us to the point where there was some resolution?
Yeah. So on October 5th, Jessica was reported missing. On 5 days later, we found a portion of her remains. So by the 7th day, we had that confirmed through autopsy and DNA. And then on the 23rd, a suspect self-identified and was arrested. It's an oversimplification of why he turned himself in, but ultimately he knew that we were about to
Getting close.
we were getting close, and so he called and confessed, and the investigation continued on from there. Collecting evidence and things like that. During the process of those 20 days, though, we received over 7,000 tips that were investigated. We canvassed 1,600 houses, right? So door to door, full consent searches of houses, cars, fields, parking lots, in a variety of different places. We worked with 75 different law enforcement or public safety entities.
Oh,
yep, all the way
75.
from, and that's who we identified, right? Some of those, I'm sure that there's somebody that we missed who showed up on those volunteer days,
Just
for
to help.
example. Yeah. But 75 agencies came to our assistance. We identified over 1,800 law enforcement professionals who came to help. And so we accomplished things that there's no way that our agency at that time, we were
Sure, on its
183
own,
sworn, would have been able to do. But that partnership was incredible. And ultimately, that partnership got us the results that we wanted. I remember, even though I worked day shift, there were super long days, and as you can imagine, the emotional strain was heavy, right? And I referenced that this case had touch points from Colorado Springs to Wyoming, because during this time, there was also a reported abduction in northern Colorado that ended up in Wyoming, and we were having schools calls saying, "Hey, we think we see this."
The collective, this is something I was going to talk about too, the collective anxiety of the community at large. I can't imagine the number of calls you all were getting from community members saying, "Is it safe to send my kid to school?
Right.
How can you be sure the community is going to be secure? What are you doing?" Right?
Absolutely.
Turning to you for that kind of support and reassurance and reaffirmation, and right while you're in the heart of trying to figure out what happened with Jessica.
Right. And those concerns weighed heavy on those of us that were involved because we didn't want this to happen. We were going to get this guy, right? Or person, right? We didn't know.
Right.
But we didn't want that to happen to any other part of the community, right? We didn't want this to be a serial event. And that weighed heavy on everybody. So we were working long days. And then you go home and you couldn't sleep.
Right.
Right.
Sure.
But you got up and you came back in the next day.
What else am I missing? There's got to be something. There's got to be an answer here, right?
Got to be.
So talk about the more personal relationship with a family that's going through an experience like this. When we talked to Deputy Chief DeAndre, he talked about the relationship that he formed with the Keys family, with Emily, and how significant that is and was for him, but also how important for that family who's waiting and wondering and counting on you. And
yeah, specifically our public information officers and our chief of police, Lee Burke, had that personal connection with the Ridgway families. And our victim services folks, boy, we had victim advocates in the house, basically protecting the Ridgways from intrusion of the media and other, well-intentioned but intrusive folks. And that connection continues to today, right? Jessica's mom remarried. Several years ago, we hosted a national FBI class at Westminster for child abduction response tactics. And just then, she came in and talked to the class. And that's the first time she's ever publicly addressed anyone. Yeah. And in this class, right, there's 100 cops, everything from chiefs to detectives. And you could hear a pin drop, and most of us were weeping. Right? That is who we do the work for.
Goes back to what you were saying about your team, the school resource officers, and the why.
Right.
They're doing it to make a difference, to make a positive impact, and at their core, right? And so when we have the opportunity to hear from people who have personally experienced things with their family, and the appreciation for those who came to help, all those volunteers, all the people in Westminster, all the people that you connected with.
Right.
Even though we didn't get the resolution we had hoped for, right? We would have hoped to have found her alive and well, and that's not, but we've got answers.
Right.
And move forward with some resolution there. So, Tim, you're doing all of this intense work, guiding your team, helping with operations, organizing all these different groups, going through all of the different teams that are out there during the day and night, and not sleeping at night.
Right.
Talk a little bit about the personal impact, not just the professional impact. We kind of heard the stages that you went through, but for you and your family.
Yeah, that was a really challenging time. So professionally, I was the supervisor for the detectives overseeing crimes against persons and crimes against children. So at that time, we had a steady diet of child victims. It was really difficult. My wife was the manager of a high acuity pediatric cancer unit in downtown Denver. And we had an 8 and 11-year-old daughters at home. And so to have a 10-year-old girl missing,
was 10.
It was crushing. And so it brought everything that we had in our professional world home for my wife and I. And I remember a couple of different things. First off, the connection that we had with our girls' elementary school was key. Because there was a couple times where I needed to call and talk to the principal and just say, here's what's going on at home. We need your help, please. And that we had that relationship prior to this incident was essential. Also, at the school level, the day that the offender was arrested in this case, the day shift operations had worked all day, right? We started at 6 a.m, worked all the way through, and then we had just gotten home, and I got a call back to say, we need you to come back in. We've got him. So we worked all the way through the night, doing all the things that we needed to do operationally to make sure that happened. And then when I left, it was about 10 a.m. the next day. My girls were at school, and I called my wife and I said, I'm on my way home. I need you to get your shoes on, get ready to go. I just need to go see the girls.
I was going to say, you need to put my arms around my girls.
Yep. And so I called and asked the principal, I said, can you just set aside a conference room, bring them down to the office? I just need a little space. And it was interesting because we got there before they pulled the girls down from class. But when we walked in, one of the school administrators was making that phone call home to say, we haven't seen this student yet today. Can you give us a call? Which is the way that Jessica's case started. And it was more than I could emotionally hold. Right?
Absolutely.
We went in the conference room. I held my girls for a few minutes and said everything was going to be fine. And that I wanted them to feel safe also because they were experiencing this. And went back and went and got some rest. But it took us a long time to untangle that knot. My wife and I were running a lot then, and the girls were riding their bikes out in front of us. That was our kind of evening routine.
Be together. And
I remember our norm prior to the case was that the girls might get, out of sight just a little bit. And we were okay with that.
Be kids.
Yeah, right. And my wife and I had to have a conversation of, it's not normal for us to not let them do that, right? There was a time where my wife was like, if I can't see you.
Sure.
Right? So we just had to really reconnect and readjust as a family. These cases, these things that we do for others have such a huge impact. And they sometimes destroy families. But if we can support officers, investigators, criminalists, nurses, cops, firefighters in the work that they do, then that just makes the community so much better.
Talk about that mental health piece that you had brought up earlier too. Collectively as a community too, even now, I think I still see and can feel the impact of Jessica when there are things that come up, right?
Yep.
People, this is a part of who we are now. And so when we hear now there's a missing kid again, in the school settings, I know those principals, those teachers, those families, those parents holding their breath and remembering and hoping.
Right. And law enforcement moves quickly because we know that we have to. It's a collective gut check when these things come up now. But we know that we've got the partnerships and the teamwork to make things work and make it better for the community. and for those individual families, no matter how that touch point is, right? My story as part of this is one of 1,800, and everybody's got a different perspective. And even today, I go and teach at other agencies, and someone will come up and say, "Hey, you probably don't remember me, but," and sometimes I do, and sometimes I don't. But I'm always thankful because in those moments, they were there for us as a community and as an agency, and I always want to hear their story.
Sure,
because it's different. It's,
right.
I didn't know that happened.
Absolutely.
So it's very, very, very cool.
Your experience and lessons learned have really set the tone for Jefferson County, the Jefferson County CART, or the Child Abduction Response Team. Talk a little bit more about that group.
Yeah, that morning, especially on the 6th, when I remember standing in that room and realizing we were never prepared for this. That's my commitment to the CART team. And it's a commitment to the community. In law enforcement, there's a lot of turnover, just like in every profession. Sure. And so with that turnover and promotions and just organizational change, people receive training and then they go on to do something different. And so in Jefferson County, we want to make sure, number one, we are there with the CART resources to support kids and families.
Don't lose the history and the lessons learned, make the same mistakes again, right?
Exactly.
We don't want to do that over and over again.
Exactly. And then the other piece of that is the law enforcement agencies have a co-response agreement and co-support each other. So every other year, the CART team gets together and trains. And that's a big commitment, all the way from the DA's office to the smallest PDs. Sheridan PD contributes to that team. And if Sheridan has a missing kid, you're going to have Lakewood and Westminster and Jeffco Sheriff and Arvada standing in the ready for the call.
That speaks to what you were talking to earlier about people coming together. You might, as a local agency, not have the capacity and or the experience to be able to walk through something like that. So to have a resource like this that you can count on to come and say, here's where we need to start,
right?
And here's how we need to coordinate.
And here's some things that you can pre-plan with, right? Like tactics for patrol in missing kids investigations. And the biggest piece of that is be open to more, to discover that this is more than just a runaway, right? We deal with runaways all the time. And kids run away for a lot of different reasons, but we have to be able to say there's more to this case than just that.
If we find out we're wrong, great.
Yeah.
Right.
Then
but if we waste time because we assumed that it was something that it's not, then we miss out on the opportunity to really save lives.
Yes, absolutely. And timing is the key element. We have to be able to ramp these things up quickly, efficiently, and if we demobilize, okay.
Yeah.
Right, that was a great training exercise.
We can learn. Yeah, I was just going to say we can learn from that.
Yeah.
That training matters. We had a couple of guests on last week who talked just about that. We can't necessarily train for the exact event,
right?
But training allows us to kind of exercise our decision-making structures and muscles to say where are there things that we want to be sure to avoid and change before we need to use them.
Exactly.
So I just am so thankful, Tim, for you being here today to talk with us and share your experience and expertise. And our listeners, I'm sure, are more curious and have a lot more questions that they want to ask, so we may have to have you back. But I appreciate your daily commitment to keeping schools and the community safe and all that you add to Jefferson County and beyond. Wow. So thank you so much. We are lucky to learn from your expertise. This conversation has been brought to you by the Jeffco DeAngelis Foundation. More information about the foundation can be found at www.deangeliscenter.org.